Right. Aim of the day. I got what I want to say. I'm just gonna rattle it off. Don't be ignorant. Read other people. Read authors you don't want to read. Read authors who have completely different ideas to you. If you're a straight white man, read some black feminists. Read some white feminists. Read some. I will not say half caste anymore. That's why I want to write this, because it's like I grew up in an environment which half caste is a regular thing that just isn't racist, but I think it might be racist now, which I don't know how that works out to. I mean, I guess the M word wasn't racist at the time. Well, no, it was, right? Like, if you're a slave owner and you're blurting out the hard R, that's out of racism. It's not just like, oh, that's a word you generally use. No, no, no. That is just straight up, that's just hate speech. Um, but like, read works from a time where half caste is an everyday thing, right? We read those types of works from cultures where you're uncomfortable. Don't just read the classics. Read the classics. Try to read as many as possible, and try and read the ones you love, and read the ones you don't necessarily love, and just sort of look at a classics list and read ones that might challenge you a little bit. Never read Jane Austen, because I said so. Never read Jane Austen. Never read Jane Austen. Burn everything. And never burn someone's book. You know, um, that's madness. Don't pull a Fahrenheit 451. But just read widely. And I think read widely when you're young, so when you're older you can. And this is a hard thing too, because like when you're young you want to do what you want, and when you're older you're probably more versed to opening up the area and the spectrum, and but like doing the opposite is good, because if you just read like the things you like when you're a young writer, I think some people might have been able to pull it off. You look at someone like Yeats, right? W.B. Yeats. I bet he was just basically reading Milton and Shakespeare every half hour of the day for the rest of his life. Because that was like the canon. But that canon's changed now, and I think the point I'm making in this video is that the canon of today serves a purpose. That we're going to read the classics, and we're going to read the foundations because we need to know the foundation. Then we're going to go on and read some later works because we need to know how it developed. Then we're going to read some modernist works because we need to see that all of it in general is a crucial time in our history of like, well, civilization in general. Once you're getting out of that 19th century, 1899, and you're getting into you're getting out of that cowboy territory, and America's becoming, what we know today as America. And you're getting your 30s and such an industrial, and you're getting your depressions and how that affects us, and World War One, and then World War Two, and Cuban Missile, and the effect that World War Two had such a massive effect on so many nations, but especially us, rationing for like 10 extra years and that more. So it's like, you have to read those modernists because it just shows you what led up to the world that we have today. Then read contemporaries, and you don't necessarily do that in the order, just as long as you know that that's the point, right? Because you want to read the whole vast world of it all, and you don't just want to read your opinion and how your opinions develop through the years. You don't just want to read works that are all about money, 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 and never touch a communist work, a bit of a socialist work, because it's like, okay, now you're just stuck in this dead end track of this is the only way life is meant to be. But the thing about reading and the thing about writing is that it's always about tackling that, and seeing other ways. And I heard recently someone put writing in such an apt way. I think it was Ellen. I got that book signed, by the way, people of the world. That Ellen book, the one I kept yapping about. I met the woman and she signed my book. Yeah! Um, yeah, I think she put it in a beautiful way. She was like, writing shows us the way things have been, the way that things can be, and how they can always change. You know, she didn't put it that way. She put it in so much of a better way. But you know, she talked about how writing itself is always to present how the world can be in such a different way. You know, we can't get stuck in a dead end track saying this is how things should be, is how things should be. Which, I mean, for a lot of us who are my age and maybe a little bit older, we know now that like this is what life has been in this sort of post industrial, um don't even know what we'd call it nowadays, but you know, like social hell. That things can't ever change. You can't bring up roads, and like you can only add, you can't take away. And you know, like buildings, especially buildings in this day, like they don't change the rent and bring down the rent so people can afford the building and have a restaurant in there. They just have derelict buildings on high streets, and it's like, the fuck is that? That serves no one. But you know, to turn down the rent serves to hurt their greed and their ego. And you know, the whole point about writing is to have authors come out today, because you know, Dickens is discussing Dickens's time. That's contemporary. Melville's discussing Melville's time, and you know, he's there as the whales are booming. You know, the whale hunting. So for us, it's like, okay, we got to read all of that and understand that that's contemporary, but that's also classic, and that's how writing was in them cultures, and show how they grow and so on. You just got to get that vast look on the world, and it's beautiful because, you know, I think writing's the one of the best ways to do that, really. Um, Absolutely. And you've got to keep it vast. You've got to keep it wide. You know, you got to read things like Revolutionary Road, because you can't just read something about the 1950s and have it just be like some beautiful work about how good America is, you know, but a work about how America is not so picket fence. You know, it's not so, as in like white. You know, as it's not just a beautiful neighborhood. It's rough. You know, like that's so important. It's so important. And the same with the rest of the world. You know, I think who we are, if you are like me, you're not necessarily going to be reading a whole bunch of Bulgarians, Estonians, or all that, you know. But when you think about the classics, Kafka and Dostoevsky, you know, and Tolstoy, like you're looking at those guys. So you gotta understand that maybe you can delve more into that world. And recently, I've been thinking, what about Mexican literature? You know, like, yeah. Um, but yeah, it's gonna be hard because there's so much to read. I'd say don't kill yourself over it. Don't make a canon. Let your canon almost be fluid, but read a lot and expand. And just, I mean, the right mindset to go at it is let the canon be fluid, and let yourself touch on different books at so many different points. But as long as you're going from classics and foundations to like contemporary, as in something that just came out the other day, and you're reading all of the in between and discussing the ideas, then you're doing well, right? Like if you're reading, what is it? Oh, I don't know what the book is. Yeah, yeah. If you're reading like The Owl and the Nightingale, and you're reading Beowulf, and then you're reading um, Canterbury Tales, and then you're reading Milton, read Yeats, read Keats, read um, Auden, right? Read Eliot, read Pound. Then go and read, like, literally, go read a poet that came out the other day, you know? Just go read a poet that came out the other day. And more, and more, and do it all over again, and do it in different directions, and just read, you know, because that's where you're gonna grow, and especially when you reach ideas you don't like, because you gotta realize, like, say you got a book that you just despise the idea of, you know, like say you're pro life and you're reading a book that's like anti, it's abortion basically, you know, it's anti life. You gotta realize that like nobody writes a story saying, anti life, you know, like nobody writes that with that mindset. They go into it and they've had experiences, decisions, thought processes, emotions that have all led up to them creating this story, and they've created a certain way to bring about a certain narrative which presents it in a certain light. You could say maybe the narrative presents it in a really, you know, anti-life um way, it's a bit dishonest to just then label it like that, you know. Then you get to look at, okay, well, a person who's went through all of this, how have they crafted their sentences and their paragraphs, and how have they, you know, what's their prose like, what's it all looking like, what's it coming together, you know, is this actually a good piece in general? If I'm to take it and just like, if I'm to take this work and to take away the theme and the genre and just put another theme and genre in and just replace the words, right? The character's not struggling with abortion anymore. They're struggling with the ability to kill someone when they have the choice. Then you're like, well, maybe the people who are pro-life are going to say that's the same thing. You know, then you get to look at it through that lens, and you know, if you are, you know, like pro-abortion for yourself all the time, and you read a book like that, then you might think, ooh, you know, what's the moral, you know, conviction if I have the ability to take a life, and perhaps it does mean that once it's in them, you know. But then you get to discuss, okay, what does that mean then? Do I have life in my womb if I'm really pro-choice, you know, or is it just a male concept of you know, I'm killing a life? You know, then you get to discuss that, you know. Then you get to sort of have a nice little outlook and say, well, what's going on? Let's replace it again, and let's. Then you get to see how the world of literature just works, and it's so like vast, and it can just communicate on so many different levels. Even if the book doesn't explicitly talk about something, it can always, you know. Then you go ahead and you look at, and that's the thing when people tell you to read a book at a certain time of your life and then read it again at a certain time of your life, because you then start, you know, love different characters. You know, you Grips of Wrath, then you've got Joad, right? You look at Joad, then look at the preacher, then you go ahead and you look at grandpa and grandma, and then you get a little bit older on, maybe you become a parent, then you end up, you know, being like the mother. You know, you read mom all throughout it. Then you read oh, her name's on the tip of my tongue. The daughter, what's the daughter's name? Rosa Sharon. Rosa Sharon, yeah, Rosa Sharon. Rosa Shawn. What an accent. Then you end up like, you know, maybe you can see it through her perspective and see what it's like to be a young woman going through such a tumultuous time, right? Like, what was it like being a young woman in the Depression? What was it like being a young woman in despair? What was it like being a young woman in Southern America? You know, just in general. Then you get to just, that's the world of writing. Be expansive, and then you can take it to your work, and then your work is not just so blanket, you know. Then you can get deep into your world and see how it connects with other worlds, and see how you can add subtext and add layers, even if it is just a story about a place at a time. You know, you can add so much to it. That's the goal of writing, you know, to show that all these places and times have such a deep complexity, which even work with other ones, and we can discuss it, and we can show how maybe things have changed, maybe things haven't changed, maybe we need to change, maybe we don't need to change, maybe, you know, you get to discuss all of that. And your work is such an important part of it, right? That is literary fiction, though. If you just want to write a guy slop romance story about two dudes in ice hockey. Oh, I remember that story. I don't remember its name. We were discussing it recently. Twice somehow. I forget it, but you know, like I'm a literary fiction guy. I'm not gonna come at. I'm just spitting everywhere. I'm not gonna come at authors and say like it's wrong to write romance. I'm not saying any of that. But like, you know, when someone's busting out work and I'm just like, you know, this is where I get to go. Maybe I should put my own words into action. You know, and instead of just reading Dostoevsky, I go ahead and read normal people. And then I'm like, damn, you know, you got to also realize, why do people write romance? Well, it's quite simple, Corey. People like romance. People want to be loved. You know, and you look at that world of romance today, and you think, oh wow, it's such a massive demographic. You know, why are people just, what, you know, you say to yourself, why are people just putting out this guy slop, let's just say like gay romance, or why are people just putting out this guy slop like rich romance, you know, or the like, what is it, Bridgerton or something? Why they, well, because people like to be loved. Is it not the same in a lot of these classics? Do these classics not have like elements of love? And maybe it's not their foresight, but you can also understand that if you do a love story well, you can show the culture well. If you write the environment well and you're honest about what existed in that time, then you can show that. Then you can show, the complexity of what it was like to just want to fall in love inside of a culture that's just so vast that people see as such an important time in history. And you can say, well, they just wanted to fall in love. Romeo and Juliet. I just answered my own question. Damn. You know? And that's, that Romeo and Juliet, maybe we'll look at normal people in the same way we look at Romeo and Juliet, because I read Normal People in the day, by the way. I love Normal People. That's why I'm bringing up as an example. I couldn't put that book down because I wanted to feel loved. I like love. Yeah, you go read a whole bunch of literature and then go expand your mind. Just go and, well, ultimately I think it is an expansion of the mind, because anyone who's grown out of being 70 years old knows how that when you're 17 years old, your mindset is just so small, man. It's like pin-sized. And mine is pin-sized now compared to me at like 35. So you gotta you have to accept that in the first place, right? Don't just be someone who's ignorant and just says, I want to live my life right now. Like, have a bit of foresight, have a bit of clairvoyance, the same way I looked at myself at 16, 17, I'm going to look at myself when I'm 35 like this when I was 25, I'm going to be like, that guy was a bit of a, and if I continue to read through that, then I can understand a whole bunch of different worlds. I become a little bit more smart. I interact with the world, and then I can maybe understand and develop what it was like to be now, and why I made the choices I made. It's a complex thing, innit? But it's like also just read, because how good is reading? Read John Steinbeck. Read John Steinbeck. Read John Steinbeck. Lastly, I'll end the video on this. The people of the education system. Hear me, oh hear me. The people of the education system who took John Steinbeck off the reading curriculums in secondary school of the United Kingdom. Not even a fan of that one, by the way. Let's sprinkle a bit of politics in that. I don't like the term United Kingdom. Not a fan of that. That maybe even Ireland, but don't tell them. No. It's madness. That one I'll get bombed for. The people who decided to take Steinbeck off the curriculum because it has some harsh words to say. I mean, I'm sorry. You're showing like a character in that time. He's gonna drop the M word like a good 20 times. He's gonna drop it fiercely with some hatred in his voice, because that's the man he was, and you're going to want to show that's the man he was, but you're also going to want to show that Lenny's Lenny. I think the whole point of that story to me, well, not really, like in this way, the way I'd sort of try to the story's just a great story of all time. Like, in my opinion, it's genuinely the greatest story of all time. The way that it shows the complexity of having to deal with someone like Lenny and being even being a carer or a caretaker in the modern day, what it means to have strength, and to have strength over your own lustful feelings and stuff like that, the way that Lenny's approached, to work, and to have to seek work and capital, and just the complexity of that sort of like post-slave world, and you've still got that prejudice. Just the human heart and the sympathy and the empathy Steinbeck writes with, and sadness and pain. I'm surprised no one's ever wrote like a what's it called? Whites Augusta Sea and Jane Eyre, that type of thing. I did it for uni, but I can't remember. I'm surprised no one's wrote like what happened after, or maybe they haven't. I just haven't seen it. Right? I assume I would have seen it. That somebody would have shown what happened after Mice and Men, or what happened before, stuff like that, and just would have wrote some fiction of their own. But I get it, like that. It's such an apt time and place type of thing. It's so. And the people who decided to take it off the curriculum. I'm ending this video now, by the way. The people who decided to take it off the curriculum. You're Judas! Judas! You know, that meme. You're Judas! Yeah. It's mad. It's mad. I genuinely believe that story is the greatest piece of fiction. Do I believe this? Absolutely. Yeah. And My Summon's better than Grapes of Wrath. I believe this. Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. The greatest story of all time is Grapes of Wrath. And these Judases, they they take it off. For what? Okay, madness. But like I get it. You're gonna probably want to put some Dickens in there. You probably want to put some modernist stuff in there. I don't know. I don't know what a curriculum is. I know that we might live in a world of people who didn't have to read Mice and Men growing up, and because of that, they'll probably never read it, and maybe its place in the literary world might go down, and I don't think it should. With my point being that this might be the greatest work of all time, on what writing means to the human heart and what it mean, like its undertones, its subtexts, all of it. Like there's a reason why. When you look at that story and you think, why would someone write this? Then you get to develop as a reader, setting. You get to look at setting. You get to look at how your prose can create all this sorts of things, and how inside a story, even the words you don't use because you're inside a certain place and time, just adds so much development to the everything of it, really. You know. That's why you don't. That's why fantasy writers don't just go willy nilly into a story. They build that world because you need a world that's built that says so many different things on so many layers when you tell a story inside that world. And when Steinbeck's world is essentially just real world, especially in this time, then you're like, whoa, this says so much. It's the greatest story of all time. And the Judases that decided to take it off the curriculum. I don't have many enemies. I'll tell you this. I have none at all. But these Judases, they make it easy for a man to separate himself from his fellow man. It's the greatest story of all time. Steinbeck, man, go read Steinbeck. I don't know. This is a video for Steinbeck Glaze. It's turned into that, but go and take all the other stuff I said before it and do that. But I think Steinbeck is so important because I think Steinbeck is the writer of today. I think from his time to the current time we're in now, he says so much and it applies entirely. But I think there's a time and place today which is getting outside of that. We're becoming post-Steinbeckian, right? We're outside of that, even though we're really similar in terms of economic instability and war and racism and the human heart and empathy and everything to do with what Steinbeck's work is to do with. I think we're at a point now where we need writers to go beyond it and to write more stories and to push us into that generation, to that next century. Which is why I think it's imperative that we read them. Judas! Yeah. Anyways, go live your life and read Steinbeck and read a whole bunch of people too, And get good at reading, man. I heard some people the other day talk about how like kids don't like reading anymore. Prove them wrong, please. Like, I get it. I do. Trust me, I get it. Trust me, Uncle. Uncle gets it. Uncle understands. Uncle understands. Uncle knows. You want to goon all day and play video games and go on YouTube Shorts. Go on TikTok. Go on Discord. Uncle knows. Uncle likes it too. Uncle likes TikTok. Uncle likes Discord. Uncle spends his fair time on YouTube Shorts. and realizes, oh, I've wasted an hour. Uncle does it too, essentially, right? Just don't die on that hill. That's all I gotta say. Don't die on that hill, because it's a hill most definitely not worth dying on. Would you give your life up for YouTube Shorts? Ooh! No. So, don't live for it either. You know, what you would die for, live for it. That's not like a whole metaphysical thing, by the way. That's me literally saying, if you're willing to die for something, you then have to live that life for it. You can't just die for it. You can't just be a martyr for it. You know, you can't just be a shagger and say I'm a Christian and then die a martyr. You know, like, it doesn't really work that way. You have to, like, go to a liturgy and pray. You go to a mass, you know, and then someone kills you because you're someone who attends mass. You can't quite just say I'm a writer and then I'm like, oh, have you written today? You're like, maybe a word or two. You know, maybe I've thought about the existence of God. Maybe it's had an impact in my life 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, you just have to apply it. Apply it. The thing you would die for. If I sit here and I say, oh, I would die for that. That's such a good cause, you know. Then you have to put your life into it. I will die for being a writer and for being a writer about Newcastle and trying to present all these ideas and just the complexity of what it means to be a writer and a poet. Therefore, I must live for it. You do the same thing. You wouldn't die for YouTube Shorts, so don't live for it either. Don't be spending 8 hours a day. Why are you watching this video? Do this! Do this! Right, I'm done.